My aunt had a camcorder when I was a kid, and we would borrow and use to just sort of make home videos and stuff. And my brothers and sisters and I, we were such hams, and we would all just like we loved having the camera around. And I think I sort of carried that through. My friends and I would start to make little films in high school, and it's just like one of those things where I felt like I was like I had a slight talent for it, and obviously at the time, if you looked back on those movies, I think you'd be like, what was he talking about? But I think it was like, there's a construction to it and being able to tell a story visually and stuff that I just felt like I really enjoyed it, first of all. And so I felt like, well, maybe this is something to explore and develop. And thankfully, my parents encouraged me to do it. And once I applied to film school, got into USC. And so I felt like, all right, well, let's just see where this leads. Yeah, that was really it. But it's just, I'm like, you kind of came around at that point in time when people are like, you have to decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And it was the one thing where I was like, I don't feel like this wouldn't get boring ever. You know what I mean? It seemed like something that I could just really dedicate my life to. And I would, there's so much there to explore that it just seemed like, yeah, it would just, I don't know. It seemed very interesting to me. I think everybody kind of steals a little bit, even guys like I see Wes Anderson or P.T. Anderson, who are some of my favorite directors, and then, and they're pretty open about it too, but then you'll see a Godard film, or you'll see like an Altman film, and you're like, oh my God, that's so that, thing. And they, and obviously as you build a, career and you build a body of work, then you start to develop your own voice. But I think everybody starts by copying somebody else, and then you almost accidentally to start to form your own voice. It's different for each project, but I think it's always about the character. There has to be a compelling character, I think, at the heart of it. And that's what I think it's like, whether it's a superhero movie, whether it's a thriller or horror or whatever. I think anything I do, there's got to be a compelling main character. And just because you need to spend time with this character, you're going to live with it for them for, a year or 2 or 3 years, and so you better like them or better find them really fascinating in some way. But that's, at least for me, that's always my way in. For me, it's kind of always a slow process, and it's a lot of like, and I tend to write with a co-writer, and so for me, it's always a lot of like long lunches and long, just bull sessions where you're kind of just sitting there and saying, well, I think there could be a scene, it's like there's no bad ideas kind of a thing, and you just kind of write down everything that you can think of where you're like, I see a scene where this character's doing this, and I don't really know what that means, but this seems like something that they would do, right? And so you start to do that enough, and then over time you start to see, oh wait, maybe there's this little story taking shape here, and you start to kind of rearrange it and say, well, maybe this should happen in the first act, or what's the perfect way to meet this character? I think with Ingrid, that was sort of our first thing, was like the wedding scene, and that was maybe the first thing that was like, okay, I don't know what this means, but that seems like a great way to introduce this character. Now where does her story go? And so, or would be the perfect foil for this character, and you kind of work backwards from there. So I think it's always a little bit different. You never know. Sometimes the idea comes from just like a flash of like, you just see an image and you don't know what does that image mean, and then you kind of interrogate it a little bit. And sometimes it's comes out a lot more fully formed, and then you're just trying to fill in the details. But it's always different. Someone asked me that in a Q&A recently. They were like, it seems like, this was a pretty charmed movie. Your first movie, you get these actors. And I was like, yeah, well, you didn't have to live the 10 years before this of like, of rejection and failure. But, not that I've had it pretty good. But, it's like you learn over time, and, you don't realize that the 10 years of, fumbling around and writing or whatever is actually informing everything that you're going to do later. I think I was kind of waiting for this perfect first project to come along or something, and it was really just like, I think what was great about this is I had another project before that I was trying to get off the ground for 2 or 3 years that I was convinced would be my first film, and it just was taking so long to get going, and I finally was like, you know what, I'm going to put this aside, and I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'll figure it out. And so I had kind of a month or two where I was just floating around and didn't really know what I was going to do, and it was kind of scary. And then I had lunch with Dave, and then, a week later we were starting to work on this, and so it was just, I think I would just say, leave yourself open. You never know where sort of inspiration is going to come from, and don't be afraid to sort of follow your this was sort of a movie that we wrote really for ourselves. We weren't writing this to sell it. We weren't writing it to impress anybody. We were just writing something that we thought we would want to see. And so I think that's really the lesson, is like, don't try to game the system. Just, be yourself and write something that you think is interesting, and just trust that you're actually not that unique, and that there's other people out there that are enough like you that they're going to like it. There's like a quote that I'm probably going to butcher that's like, you start out with all this energy and you end the film just like hanging on for dear life, it's just trying to like limping across the finish line. So, and it is kind of like that. I mean, it's a marathon, and it really does like test you in so many ways. And I think, thankfully, I've had such great collaborators around me that I really could trust, because if I didn't have the answer, I knew that somebody would have it, or we'd be able to figure it out together. And so I think, for me, with anybody, it's such a huge undertaking, whether you're Steven Spielberg and you've made, however many movies as he has, or you're making one movie. I think you want to surround yourself with people who you trust, who are going to help you when you don't know what you're doing necessarily, or you don't know how to get through the day, and they're going to say, I have an idea, or whatever, and just be open. You always go in with one idea in your head, and I think the people that I like to work with are people who, in some ways they're saying, they're echoing, they understand what you wrote and what you want to do, but they're bringing you ideas that you hadn't thought of. And so you're like, I can tell this person's going to be valuable because they're thinking about it in a way that I'm not, and they're seeing things that I'm not seeing. And I'm always interested in that. I don't want someone to just regurgitate all the same things that I'm thinking, because I'd rather feel like there's multiple brains that are all bringing different ideas to the table, Start writing and directing stuff. I mean, it's crazy how the technology now versus when I went to film school, like, you have a better camera on your phone than I had at USC, as like the best camera there. So it's like, I just think if you want to be a director, you want to be a writer, like, start making stuff, put it online, just keep, putting stuff out there, and you'll get better at it as you do it. But you don't necessarily have to do it at this scale, in order to be noticed and recognized. Not anymore, at least.